My oldest child, who is now 24 years old, my daughter Ireland, you have a child, and of course that launches you into the world of contemporary, or at least at that time, contemporary children's media and programming. I grew up in a different reality. I grew up in Bugs Bunny and, Popeye and these silly, and all the Warner Brothers cartoons. But at that time, Thomas was everywhere. And you would hear that song. Dun, da, 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 da. And I love the naivete of it. I love the innocence of it. I thought it was really I love the simplicity of it. I think it was Britt reached out to me, and Carlin had done some of it. I think Ringo was before me. And she asked me if I would voice a season of the show. The key is that I met Britt. And when I met Britt, who's this incredibly unusual woman, and she told me the story about how she got the books, the Railway series, and I just adored Britt. And when she said to me, "Do you want to do this show?" I said, "Sure." Very often when you do projects in this business, it's who's doing the asking. And there is, kind of an unavoidable likability factor. And I just really loved Britt. She was just a great lady, and we did a couple seasons of that. And then they asked me to do the film, which is a whole other saga. I think for me, and I tell people this all the time, if ever I'm talking to students, if you're interacting with student actors or what have you, that among the most difficult things to do in acting, I think, is to be light and joyful and to be happy. We all have anger inside of us. We all have pain inside of us and difficult things we've gone through. And in acting, it's easier to cry than it is to laugh. It's easier to give some very admonishing speech in a courtroom or what have you than it is to be a protagonist in a children's fantasy film and to keep it warm and simple and to have a positive lilt in everything you say. What I said to myself was, you can go too far. I'm sure some would argue I went too far, but I do come from that mindset where you're sitting there going, what time is it, Bob? You keep everything you say, what time is it? To keep everything light, bright, warm, and simple. That's tough to do. And some days you come to work and you're just not in the mood to be like, we better head back to the station. And that kind of thing. But that was the job, I felt, was to keep that character someone who was like a host. You're the host. The other characters are going through everything, and you're there kind of as a guide to help the kids go through the whole story. When we did the TV show, it was one situation, which was, it was Britt's baby, and she called all the shots, and we'd go into a booth, and she would give you very simple directions, and slow this down, pace this up, come in quicker here. When we did the movie, which was not the TV show, it was live action, we were there performing, which was a big difference, and behaving, and wearing wardrobe, and staging scenes, and so forth. I'm always of the belief that there's a right amount of takes. There's a right amount. It could be 4, it could be 8, it could be 11. And again, with this kind of children's programming, there's an ear you have. You develop an ear. Everything is sound in children's programming. I remember with the Mr. Conductor thing, I wanted to kind of keep it positive and warm and sweet even, but not the same throughout. So there were sometimes I think I lost my train of thought, and I thought I was on a Scorsese film. So I thought, let's do 30 takes of me saying, it's 4 o'clock. You want to give the director what they want. Most of the directors I've worked with, most, not all, but most are people who I admired a lot and wanted to make their movie. When you start out doing a movie, the director's the one that makes the movie, not you. You're an element of it. And filmmaking is an extraordinarily collaborative process. And you want to make sure that you're doing your part. And there were a few directors that I wanted to please as much as Britt, because I just liked her so much personally. Mara had some difficulties before we started rolling the camera, and she came to work, and we were all very concerned about that. I think her mother had passed away, and she was very, very despondent about that. Remember, that was something that cast a shadow over a lot of what we did, was her emotional state as a result of this obviously terrible thing. Britt had partners in a company that were doing this with her. And as with most movies you do, there's a swarm of non-creative people giving you their opinions of the film. And the thing I love about Britt was, like all good directors, she didn't transmit any of her tension on the set of the film. The Britt that I worked with in the booth of the TV show was the same Britt that showed up every day for the film. And I think that there's a part of me that what was difficult about the film in that way was that she thought she'd proven herself. And she didn't have to do that anymore and have to kind of convince men of what she could do and what she was capable of. There did seem to be a bit of that when we made the film of Britt Allcroft having to go back to a place that she thought she'd earned her position. She'd earned the right to have that creative self-determinism about the film. She would go off and have conversations with people, not a lot, I don't want to exaggerate, and then come back and not look very happy, and then shake that off and engage with us. She was always the warm, positive conductor, if you will. She was Ms. Conductor of the filmmaking experience and keeping it positive under those two difficult things. When I did it, I felt, you know, when we did the TV programming at the time of the film, it was right at the height of that. It was really, really like everywhere. I had people walk up to me and they would stop and they'd snap their fingers and they would turn to their little kid and they'd say, "Do you know who this is?" They'd say, "This is Mr. Conductor." Some of them got it. The parents were almost always more excited than I was about it. They sent me a chest that was a promotional gift they sent to my daughter. I probably should have just taken this and put it in storage somewhere. They gave me a chest that was designed like Thomas. So one end of the chest had the face of the character and the back was the rear, and then you opened up the middle was a chest and it was filled with Thomas toys. And it was stunning. I loved it. And it was at the foot of my daughter's bed for a while. I don't know what happened to it, but I wish I had it back. I'd put it in my office right now if I could.
Part of my own guide in creating these stories for the screen and these worlds, the world of Thomas on the island of Sodor and the world of Shining Time in the Indian Valley, is that the stories and what happens will help to give children, not in some heavy way, but what I think are the 4 emotional tools for childhood: comfort, fun, inspiration, and resilience. And I think that is very, very important to protect, whatever age you are. And it was Barry London, who was then vice chairman of Paramount Pictures, who had a little girl who was just nuts about Shining Time and about Thomas. And he came to see me in New York and he said, "Have you ever thought about making a movie?" And I said no, that I hadn't, because the stories, these mini feature films, seemed to me to be perfect in their own right. And he said, "I think you should make a movie." When Polygram Filmed Entertainment picked it up, said, "We're going to get behind this with you," I had a best part of a year in which I wrote very much the story that would finally appear on the screen, and inspired by this little girl who had written a letter saying, "Thomas, please will you come and stay at my house," which was roughly it. And she had defied a lot of those who before Thomas ever went up on the screen said, "Oh, only boys are going to be interested in this." And I said, "No, girls will be as well." And as a mother, I felt that I would love a story which would be told by a mother to her children about something that happened to her when she was a little girl. Another influence was in doing research for the story. I felt I needed some endorsement, and we went to two classes in New York of children, and it was remarkable how many of the children in those age groups said over and over again, if they were asked what makes you happy and what makes you sad, their grandparents came into how they responded to it. That either they longed to see more of their grandparents, or they longed to make their grandfather or their grandmother happy again, for exactly the reasons that I'd started writing about in this story. When it came to the actors who were going to be involved in casting, we had a storyteller for Thomas in the UK, and we had a storyteller for Thomas in the US. Alec Baldwin became storyteller for Thomas, and we just had the best time together. Loved working with him. Didi Conn, that was sort of an easy fit because she played Stacey in the ShiningTime TV series. Lily, of course, who would play Lily, and Mara was recommended to me. She had just lost her mum, and she said yes. She was just, I think, incredibly professional. I just had such a clear idea of who this man was and what it felt like to live with a loss like that. I could never have imagined in my wildest dreams that the actor who would bring him to life would be Peter Fonda. Billy Two Feathers, the casting director, suggested Russell Means. And Billy Two Feathers was a character that Rick and I had created for Shining Time, but played by a different actor at that time. I did write into the story to make Billy's character very attuned to the troubles that were happening in the Indian Valley and the bad impact that the return of P.T. Boomer could have. P.T. Boomer, I just thought Doug Lennox was brilliant right from the get-go when he came in. It was his idea to add a sort of vanity to his character, so that, for instance, in the scene where he's looking for Burnett Stone's address, looking at a pile of ShiningTime, the local paper, and then he sees the newsboy coming along, and he's filing his nails. That was a sort of bit of schmushes that was totally Doug's idea. I had first seen a dog, in my mind's eye was completely mapped. I went on a very short holiday to Key West, and there was a dog on the beach, and I've still got his picture. It's in my script. I thought, that's Matt. But his character was so important as this, again, his instincts as an animal about what needed to happen and where he needed to be. So the dog, it was perfect. Matt was great. I had gone up to Scotland where I was writing, I think it was Thomas 5, the TV series, and I happened to read in the paper about the Isle of Man, who wanted to build themselves up as a great film location. I rang them up and went to see them, and the place just knocked my socks off. I mean, it was everything I could have dreamed of. It was really only once we got onto location shooting that I truly realized the complexity of what a story and how that was going to be delivered. And I mean, to have had the talent in the key crew, many of these folks who were, stars in their own field. See, first of all, interesting to see the number of, I'm glad to say, women who were involved in leading roles in the crew, and how talented and detailed everybody was. Burnett Stone's cottage, the attention to detail of getting all these little things right, where we would see that there were no pictures on. Burnett had taken the pictures off the walls because he'd got himself this shutting down of his life. We went to Pennsylvania briefly, of course, and we shot all the big station scenes there, and then a lot of us moved up to Toronto. Several scenes, as was explained to me, would need to be matted in, and so we'd be using green screen. 2 scenes which stand out with Alec, where I'd handwritten in a lot of business that we did when he comes across Rabbit's messages and works out what he's supposed to do next and eats a carrot. And the way Alec did want to do the scene several times because he didn't feel he'd got everything in it. In a way, it's a fun scene. It's a jokey scene, you could say, because there he is, and it's real fantasy time with this rabbit writing notes and so on, but taken by Alec with great seriousness and wanting to get it exactly right for the audience. And then he and Michael Rogers, who played C. Junior, got on really well together. And there's something that I saw where once the cameras stop rolling, they cannot stop laughing. The three of them, there's Alec and Mara and Michael, just having the giggles, and it was lovely for Mara. It was lovely to see her laughing as much as she did. Sometimes it was grueling, and there'd be a lot of hanging around to get things sort of perfectly positioned, but we also had a lot of fun, and there were some important scenes. Peter came up to Toronto, and there were several scenes that involved him. When we went up to Toronto, they just started shooting all the Thomas parts of and the island of Sodor, which had its own studio. So the way they'd set it up, which was very convenient, was that we were side by side, and with many of the key members of the crew who'd been working on Thomas since the early 80s. And so I'd go from one studio to the other, but because they were a team that had been working together for, gosh, over 20 years, they all knew exactly what they were doing. In order for this world to look like I had it in my imagination, we worked in this way of live-action model animation. We couldn't make the, like, Sir Topham Hatt or the animals move as well. It wasn't sort of, you couldn't have everything moving, it wouldn't have worked. But we had long debates about what would happen when it came to their faces. We took the decision that it was going to be way too complex in this particular way of shooting live action model animation to be able to have the mouths moving. And that also became part of the charm, I guess the word is, the charm of this world of the island of Sodor. When I was told that the film needed to be substantially shorter, I don't think anybody there really understood how big this film was becoming, and all these wonderful actors all joining in to be in it. Of course I realized that the film would be an enhancement and that I had a responsibility, because the company had gone public, of being vice chairman of the company, but I saw no reason whatsoever why I should have to cut the film, and it would turn it at the heart of the movie, for me, would be pulled out of it because so many of the scenes tied in. When it was complete, it only added to this magic world of Thomas. And Boomer had come out because this test showing had said that he was too scary. And my inspiration, you could say, for the character of Boomer and why it would work for children was based on the tradition of the British pantomime. There's always the baddie, but you know he's baddie, but you can hiss at him. And then Peter, because he was sad. Sometimes grown-ups just underestimate children's ability to take something in. But there was also a scene which came out of the movie and which was, to me, so important to the story, and that was he shows that he cares. Yes, he's sad, he's grumpy, but he really cares about his granddaughter Lily, and where he's on the phone calling to Stacy because Lily has not got off at the right station. She didn't get off at Muffle Mountain. She goes on to Shining Time for good reasons, but he's worried about her. Russell Mean's character, that was just shocking to have his scenes cut down because, as an executive noted, who shall be nameless, couldn't understand a ... word he was saying. It was heartening for me to see how much the film is loved 20 years on. But where there was negative criticism, I was expecting it because I knew why they felt like that. And if the scenes had been left in, they wouldn't have felt like that. I loved writing it so much. I think that the mystery of the mind is that where does it all come from? And I knew I wanted him to be a diesel, but 10? It just sounded right. Diesel 10. Like 10 out of 10 for devious deeds, and there was a rhythm to it that I could play with. It was so intriguing for me to come up with these names. P.T. Boomer. It just sounded like a villain. The idea of that image of someone who's coming over a hill towards a place that's filled with beauty and love, but this being is gonna wreck it. Doesn't like things to be happy, doesn't like things to be beautiful. The gratitude I feel of what is said to me and that it was meaningful. I should be so lucky.
I'm the oldest of my sisters and brother, and my brother's the youngest, and I was in my teenage years when he was born, and spent some time, watching him periodically, and as he got a little bit older, watching him, and would watch stuff that he enjoyed watching, and one of them was Thomas, the Thomas the Tank Engine and the Shining Time Station stuff, as it would be aired on, I guess, public broadcasting. That's how I became familiar with it, but you can't really, you'll always know that that particular character, it was always around. It was, you saw things in stores, whether it be toys or books. I was extremely familiar with it and found it magical and endearing. And when the feature film came out, I was in film school and I was a projectionist at a local movie theater. So I built the 35 millimeter print of that film, and I would often screen films the night before their release. We call it checking the print, but we're not checking the prints. We're watching the movie before anyone else does. And so I stayed and watched the film because I was really interested in it. And my first reaction was that it was charming, but it felt a little choppy, and it felt as if kind of like when you watch Superman 2, knowing that Richard Donner had created certain scenes and then Richard Lester came in and created you feel like there's an unevenness, like there was a type of contention between the creative forces behind the movie that led to a film that wasn't quite what was planned and coordinated from the beginning. Whatever the vision was, it felt incomplete. I had worked on a few projects where I had to kind of rebuild or reconstruct a film from raw materials, and I really loved that process. I was asked, hey, would you take a phone meeting with Britt Allcroft about potentially working with her to assemble a version of what she hoped to create with Thomas and the Magic Railroad, the feature film. And I was like, absolutely, I would love to. So I talked with her, and our conversation was pretty short at the beginning, but somewhere in that conversation, I heard a sadness and a hesitant response to working on a project like this. But yet there was a heartbreaking kind of sound to her voice. I don't know. There was something there, and that I connected to it. I wanted to learn more. So I'd emailed her and asked her, hey, could we just have a conversation? I'd love to have just a conversation with you, and we could talk about really anything, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about this. And so she started telling me, how, like, what she had gone through in the production, and how it was kind of this escaping hole in her career, this sort of unfinished business aspect of what she had done, that this may be an opportunity, however hesitant she is. And I told her I would love to work on this, and I'd love to tell her story, and I would love to I'd love to take whatever material there is and try to maybe make some kind of sense of it, make something come together that may be a comfort for her. There's a lot of legal reasons at that time that prevented Shout to fully take on, like, recreating her version of the film. Not that they weren't interested, but it was just a complicated task, and they weren't quite sure if that's something that they should take on, whatever reasons that they had. And I was really intrigued with it, and still am. I'm very much intrigued with it. I was from the beginning. The idea of trying to rebuild and Frankenstein together the closest to her vision as humanly possible. And so I went to her home, and I spent a lovely day with her, an entire day. It took the entire day to film the interview. I filmed hours and hours of footage, and there's like many variations of stories and stuff that we would go through. And I knew that she was trying to be very, very diplomatic in her responses, but at the same time was encouraging her to be as open as possible and to be as honest as possible. And that was very important, that the world knew her side of the story. Months and months later, after we finished the material, she sent me excerpts where she wanted to talk about the release and talk about getting it out there and everything. And she sent me excerpts, like a couple of paragraphs, where she mentions me and the relationship that we had working together, because we worked very closely for about 5 months. And so she wanted to mention it. She just wanted to get my approval of using my name and everything. I was like, it's fine, whatever. I was just happy to help a person that I deeply respected, and over the course of time talking with her, you can't help but just kind of fall in love with her vision and her passion and her sincerity, and I was just happy to play a very small role in helping her heal a few wounds from her past. I don't think we really achieved what we all hoped to in that window of time, and I think part of it was that we were, the time that I filmed her interview was the holidays right before the pandemic really hit. As a matter of fact, when I filmed the interview with Alec Baldwin in New York, he on the cab ride to the airport back from filming that interview, the cab driver had the radio on, the news on, and they were talking about certain cities were starting to shut down, and that there were people that were booked on flights and airports going to those cities that are stranded. And I was like, oh my God, am I going to get out of New York in time to get back to Atlanta? And I remember all that happening during the course of filming the interviews for this. And that's why there's several interviews that are on that are done Zoom, because there was no other way to do their interviews. It was intended, several of the people we had lined up to film, it was intended to get them on camera, and never did. And that's kind of a thing with me that I feel like is my unfinished business with this project, because I overshot a lot of material with Britt, and I had hoped that there would be an opportunity someday for me to make an honest to God documentary that really delved into everything with more detail and included more interviews, and that's a thing that just, I guess, won't happen. But I was hoping that there would be a possibility down the road to make that work. Watching it for the first time, I was sitting in a movie theater all by myself watching it. So I felt that it was uneven, and it was clear to me that there were aspects of it that weren't fully realized. But all that aside, I think it's a beautiful film. I still like the film. I actually took my kids to the Fathom anniversary screening event, and this is the first time they had ever watched the film, and it was great to watch the film with them and see how they responded to the story. So when we got to that part in the interview, she needed to take a moment and clear her head. And then she went through all of it, and she was trying to do it in a way that didn't seem vindictive, angry, or because it's really not her. I mean, it's not her. I would say it's not her character. Clearly, she's passionate, and with passion, sometimes when you want to fight, you have to fight for things. Sometimes you have to fight for visions. You have to fight for opportunities, and I think she had to do a lot of that. And what's great about it, as she's telling about her experiences, the thing that was so special was that she wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for the vision. She was fighting for the characters. She was fighting for the story. And all of this was important to her. And to disrupt any aspect of it just because someone that doesn't quite understand but thinks that they understand what kids want, but not understand the character and the story that she created. That conflict, really, I think it really affected her. The thing is, she didn't give up. I think that she fought as hard as she could, and without being there on the set, I think I got the impression through others, but being there on the set, not being there on the set, makes it hard for me to really understand but I can only imagine by how she described it and how others described her as a director and a storyteller on the set. She did her best to work with them and find compromises that made everybody happy, but she did fight for the integrity of, and I think she did it so stealthily that most of the cast didn't quite pick up on it. They may have been clued into it by others, but Alec Baldwin, I asked him many times, and he told me that you wouldn't have known that she was going through all of that in the background. He had sort of found out as they were in the post-production part, certainly when they were having to do some of the additional work towards the end of the production. But yeah, I know that it was important for her to convey what she tried to do, but it was also important for her to convey it in a way that wasn't bitter and vengeful or anything like that. Again, it's not her character, even though it hurts. I feel like she was trying really hard to get her side out and how she felt out and be honest about it, but in a way that was also respectful. I was in a wonderful position, and this happens every once in a while. When I'm working on a project where I work with the director or the main creative body on a film, and I get access to, probably in the hands of, let's say in the hands of anyone listening, anyone that's interested and have been fans of Thomas all their life, they would be like, in the presence of like maybe the Holy Grail or something like that. But it's like, she sent me all this material, and then she said, look, I was looking around for any type of elements. All we have are these dailies, and they're all on VHS, because at the time, when they would transfer the material, it would be to like a VHS, and the director would have a VHS cassette player in their hotel or wherever they're staying, and they would watch the dailies sometimes at night, take notes, so she had all these dailies, and so she just sent me this. There's like 4 boxes, just jammed with VHS tapes, and they're each labeled things like day 4, camera B, B-roll 6 or whatever. It's just like just an entire mess. So I first took all the tapes, and in my office floor, I put them all in sequential order of the dates and sequence of camera A, camera B, camera C, and and then I brought out I have a nice VHS deck encoder, and I encoded all this footage. Hours and hours and hours and hours of footage, and take after take after take, gaff after gaff after gaff. It was actually amazing. And because I've always been an editor, I looked at it as like, I'm not going to try to fix anything. I'm just going to take this footage, and I'm going to be the editor of this version of Thomas and the Magic Robot. And she sent me her shooting script with all of her notations of what she thought was the best take. And I just followed the shooting script like an editor. I would follow the notations from the director, follow the script, and start assembling this. And there were a lot of things that were in the script, but I couldn't find footage for. And she would say, well, that may be on this tape or maybe on this tape, but it may be lost. And so there were a couple of scenes that I didn't have anything to represent, but for the most part, I assembled the entirety of the film. And where I didn't have something, if it existed in the final film, I would cut to that and just use what's there. And there were some effects things that weren't finished. And I thought if I did this, that I might get Shout interested in the prospect of, hey, we've got this long version, and this may be kind of cool. But there was, like I mentioned, and this is not Shout. Shout is amazing. Shout is an amazing company, and always have the fans' best interest at heart. I know just from behind the scenes how much they struggle to create the best representation of whatever film or series that they're putting out. They really do the best they can. They don't. I don't think that they're at fault. And to be honest, I'm not sure the rights holders are at fault. It just seemed like sometimes people are motivated by fans wanting something so much they have no choice. I mean, a good example would be, the release the Snyder Cut thing, which is a very rare thing to happen, where fans, they were so loud and omnipresent and really pushed and held strong, and that you had something that it really honestly, right moment, right time. HBO was like, what do we have? And like, oh, we have this film that everybody wants to see, and we can kind of finish it, and we have some kind of event thing that we don't have to do an incredible amount of work for. And I think it was just it was a perfect symbiosis of these different elements working together, whether they be tragic or not. And I think that I really don't know why or how that cut could come together. It's certainly, I think there's probably an aspect where they're like, oh, it's all VHS tapes of this. It's not going to look spectacular. And I think there's a way to make it work. My thought was, there's so many films that I would love to see. I mean, an example, a big Orson Welles fan would love to see Magnificent Ambersons in the version that he created, intended. And I know there have been many attempts and there are versions out there, but if someone said there's VHS footage of all the takes we could assemble from it and get close to the vision, I would be 100% let's see it. That would be exciting, just to kind of get an idea. I think that people, their imagination can fill in the holes, and we can certainly, as I looked at the footage, I saw her vision. I was just excited to see things take shape that change the story, and I do think that the vision that she had was a better vision for the film. I think it maybe ahead of its time, because maybe at that time what people wanted out of what they considered to be a children's feature, a film geared towards kids, they probably didn't want so much depth of character, and maybe didn't want the conflicts to be too dark, maybe is the best way of saying it. Maybe I feel like that probably was one of the main reasons they moved in that direction. But the one thing that Britt would always say, kids are smart. There's darkness in the world, and kids find ways to work through it, to create something, let's say, that's a little bit more serious, and maybe deals with subject matter that might be a little bit more difficult for them. I think that in the end, in this world that she's created, this land that she's created, I feel like they would be better for it coming out, understanding what she was trying to do and where these characters were going, and they would learn something about life and how they would handle with some of those situations that many of us encounter. And I think this was her response to the many fans that had reached out to her, and this was her trying to do the best she can to appease is the wrong word. She was not trying to do anything just to make everybody happy. I think she was doing it because she thought it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing for the film, and that was her vision. And I think through her I learned a lot about the fans and the fans' response to the film and what the fans hoped for. I tried to do the best I could, given my limitations, to help her make the fans happy. I wanted to make a documentary. I love when I find a story that I really believe in. Being able to tell that story as in-depth and dramatic as humanly possible. And I wanted to tell her story. And because I really loved who she was, I just wanted to do something that celebrated her, her creation, all of her work. I really wanted to pay tribute to that. And she was so sweet and passionate. And at the same time, I loved. I loved there's a twinkle in her eye that I could tell she could be aggressive about certain things. Again, always to serve what she's trying to do, not to serve herself. But I love that experience with her. And so I wanted to tell that story. The process of assembling all this stuff so it could be used in some capacity on the release was taking up a lot more time than I was budgeted for. And but I did it anyway, and I gave so much man hours to that that I really didn't care that I was getting back as far as financially. And it became complicated to create a documentary. At that time, I never thought of Zoom as a way to facilitate the lack of being able to film interviews in person. I always traveled and filmed interviews. The interview that you see with Britt is really just me and Britt at her home for about, it was almost 10 hours. So that was me. I was always just me and a camera, and I travel and I film because I wanted that trust and that form of intimacy there, where they're comfortable with me and they know me and they know that I'm here to represent them. I wanted them to understand that was important to me. That their story is safe with me. It's protected. So when I realized I couldn't travel to film all the interviews that we were lining up. Luckily I'd gotten a few of them right before we went into lockdown, but I did travel to get Alec Baldwin. That was all because of timing. He had a window of time and I had to jump on it immediately to make it work. The rest of the stuff there ended up being Zoom, and there were several people that I would have filmed interviews with that were lined up, but it became a complicated thing because most of the people didn't understand Zoom or didn't see that as a platform that they could use to do an interview or to be conducting an interview on. So it was like now, people say Zoom, people use Zoom all the time. People use Zoom to communicate with family members that are not living with them, that are living in some other state or some other country or whatever. But at the time, it was not something that people understood, and getting them to do that was really complicated. And many times they say we could do one over the phone, but we can't do it. And I couldn't make sense of stuff I filmed and then stuff I did on Zoom, combining those elements together to build a narrative like I wanted to. I couldn't quite make that work, and so I settled on using the stuff that I had and just creating a series of feature ads. And that ended up being the only solution at the time. If the project had come about even a couple of months earlier, I would have probably had everything in the can that I needed, and the timing was wrong. They were working on a deal with Fathom, and I think that might have played into it a little bit. I just remember finding out that it got pushed, and that gave me a little bit more time, but that was about it. And this took a lot. This was an undertaking that was very important to everyone involved, especially Britt and Shout. Shout really wanted to make sure that Britt was happy with everything that was being done, and that was very important to them. And so there could have been an aspect of where certain things had to be maneuvered to help facilitate what she'd hoped to achieve with the release. Now we're all accustomed to it. You watch the news and you'll see interviews with certain people. They're done through Zoom or some other platform. So, at that time it was different. People weren't used to it and couldn't quite prepare. I've got the video of them, I've got the Zoom of Mard, talking. It's like I've got that there. I could sit and watch her talk, but what I ended up using was not. My favorite was Britt, essentially because it was the most important interview for me. I really did fall in love with, her sincerity and determination and her passion, and I just thought she was wonderful. A wonderful person. And it was important for me to service her and her vision and what she hoped to achieve with this release. I wanted to be the conduit between her and the distributor and try to make sure that I did everything I could in my power to make her happy. And I know Shout wanted everything I wanted her to be happy. I know Shout was very, very passionate about, doing everything they can to help her release something that would be closer to what she had hoped. And, the best way we could have done that was including those deleted scenes. Everything that I used came directly from Britt, her archive. She sent me boxes of stuff. She had an assistant that was helping her at the time go through everything. And, I opened the door one day and there were 3 heavy boxes filled with stuff. The script was neat because I also had a lot of doodles from her. She kind of doodled sort of these little storyboard scenes, and it was really neat seeing all that, and all of her handwritten notes. And she sent me lots of photographs to scan that were all about her life. It was pretty neat. There's a lot of neat things there. There's a lot of things that I would say, of all the things I accumulated in that project, I might have used 30 to 40% of. So there's a lot on the cutting room floor. There are a whole slew of considerations that would come from having to rebuild a full-fledged director's cut. Britt had concerns because there were certain effect scenes that we either didn't have access to or they were never completed. And the fact that it was all VHS footage, if we had access to the film elements, that probably would have went a longer way with convincing Shout to convince Sony to really put up the effort. So it was like, we have this VHS footage, so it's not going to look great. That is one aspect that was a roadblock. Not knowing where that film footage is, that search continued on. I remember the last communication I had with Britt, she was still looking for it, and it was like years later. It was like 2 years after, I guess, we were dealing with this. I think those are mostly, and I mean, there were some rights related things, but I think those would have been handled. I think those are mainly problems that were faced at the time. It just wouldn't have been an attractive prospect. And it's possible that everyone involved thought that the film elements would turn up and that opportunity would present itself. And when it did, people would be more motivated to jump on the opportunity to release a director's cut. I don't think it's because no one was interested in it, or I don't think it was because no one involved was interested in it, because I know that Shout found it intriguing, and I know Britt was very passionate about it, and I was very, very, very committed to whatever it would take to right a type of wrong in Britt's life. So that being said, I mean, I still hope that the footage somehow turns up somewhere, but I don't know. They're not technically deleted scenes because scenes would be fragmented. My thought was, since we couldn't assemble the film, that we could at least take the storylines that were cut and assemble them so that you could watch the thread of certain characters. You could see the whole thread of that, as opposed to watching one scene after the other, I felt like that would be better to kind of put it together as a type of story arc as opposed to just a deleted scene. That might have been partly my decision. Oh, as I mentioned, I loved working with her. It was a thrill. She basically sent me all the elements and sent me her shooting script and any notations. When I was hung up on something, I would call and ask her, and she was very, very approachable for me. I mean, I had access to her. I think there was a couple times I called really late, and she was like, "Call me late, call me whenever. I really want to be able to be here to service whatever you need." And so, yeah, I was kind of left alone. I'd done enough of this kind of work to know that if I followed the script and I looked for the right takes, there were several times that there wasn't notation for which take she preferred, and I kind of used my instinct as an editor of like which ones work better, and just tried to do, I tried to do the best I could and make sense of what I had at my disposal. There wasn't really a restoration process. I really just encoded all the tapes in the best ability that I had. I cleaned up some of the sound because there was some sound issues, and ultimately I think that was it. I didn't do too much to restoration work. It was mainly taking raw elements and assembling them, and then doing a little cleanup to try to make them more presentable the best way I could. There was not really much you could do with old VHS tapes that had been stored in probably not the best climate conditions. So you really just do the best you can. It's better than nothing, I guess. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I thought, if this is all we get, it's better than getting nothing at all. There were animatics for lots of scenes, and I had access to them because they were the best visual representation of the Thomas footage that would be inserted into the film. So the whole goal was like, while the editor is assembling the live action footage, the editor would have something to represent the scenes that were still being done that were Thomas related. And that way they could build the timing and start to get an idea of how the show was going to take shape. And so I had some access to those things, and I used that, I think, to plug in a scene that either didn't get completed the way she wanted to. I can't really remember now. I was motivated by something. It might have been motivated by the fact that this is really cool and we should use some of it. It could have been that simple. But I do know that there were a lot of tapes that had some animatic stuff on. And there were one or two things that I had storyboard art for that I animated somewhere in that process. Yeah. I also reviewed everything, and I think we included everything that we could on this release. There was not much more we could do. We could have tried to delve deeper, but we were running out of time, and we were trying to hit this deadline of like something combined with the Fathom events anniversary and stuff like that. So we were trying our best to just make sure we included all that we could. I was very happy with the Blu-ray. And like everything, I always feel like I deliver my work print. I put everything into trying to create the best features possible, but they're never what I consider to be my best. So there's many things that I wish that I could do different. But I was happy with it, and I was happy that Britt was happy with it, and I was happy that we were able to invested so much time and to try to assemble these scenes. This is not like there was a tape with a whole scene on it. This was like tapes after tape after tape of different takes, different angles, different scenes. And I really tried my best to get in the head of what she was trying to do with film and try to recreate it the best way possible. I still have all that stuff digitized. I have everything. I have access to everything that I did. But I really tried my best to give it my best. I don't know. It's I'm happy that something out there exists that has even a fragment of what she intended with the film, and that's available for fans to appreciate. And that's ultimately the most important part of this whole project, was trying to right a wrong.
Do you have any words of inspiration or encouragement to aspiring filmmakers?
I get asked that question a lot, and as a person that has always wanted to be involved in film since I was 5 years old, it's all I ever wanted to do in my life. I've never really veered from that. I learned the most from creating some kind of film, whether it's a documentary or it's fictional. I learned the most by doing, and I always say doers do, dreamers dream. I always ask of people that want to get involved in filmmaking to do two things. Do it, create things, create horrible short films, implement horrible ideas, and really through that mess that you create, learn how to manipulate those ideas and learn how they work, learn what made it not the right direction, so then you can kind of figure out what will work for you and telling your story. That's always the thing that's important. And I think the other aspect is really watch movies. Don't watch just what's available at your local cinema. Don't watch what's available on streaming, but it was just like find movies that interest you way to the silent era. Find things that will help you understand this medium that has existed for so long and has created some of the most amazing visionary things that you never even dreamt of. People in the silent era would never think that this would become an art form that was so impactful and filled with so many different ideas and different technologies have come together and grown with it and have created whole worlds that look as real as the one that we open our eyes to every morning when we wake up. And I feel like you really do have to do and really figure yourself out. If you're going to be a runner, then you have to learn to walk. You have to get up and move your legs, understand how they work. You have to fall down. You have to get back up. And I feel like it's the same with this. It's the same with everything. Go out there, make mistakes, make big mistakes. Learn from them, and it builds character, and it makes you. I think it makes you a better storyteller.
So, finally, are there any last words you would like to say to Thomas fans, young and old?
Yes, the time I've spent on that island that was created, from a very visionary storyteller. The importance of sustaining that vision and those stories and passing them along from generation to generation is the best way that I think you can respect not only Thomas as a creation, but the creators responsible for Thomas. So pass all that on. If you have kids, pass it to your kids. If they have kids, pass it to your grandkids. But try to keep it alive and keep your hopes alive. Now more than ever, we need that sincerity. We need that truth of heart, and it's a rare thing to find. And the fact that it exists in all these different mediums and within all these different stories, it's very magical. And I feel like we need to appreciate it, cultivate it, and make sure it has a life beyond our years.
I did a lot of movies that were mostly kids movies. My parents always thought that there weren't enough kids movies out there, and people have asked me, why were you in Thomas? Why were you in A Simple Wish? And my answer is, I had to keep acting, and if you sort of do as a child actor, you have to keep going. It's inertia, in a way. There can really only be so many To Kill a Mockingbirds. If you're going to be a child actor, a lot of the successful child actors I know have been in some pretty terrible movies. And honestly, I had a lot of fun doing those. Thomas was one of the most fun times I've ever had in my life, just traveling, and everybody on the set was just so much fun. It was a really good time. But I think I had always known that I didn't want to be an actor. In fact, the thing that I liked most about performing when I was little was telling stories. There are clips of me doing screen tests for Doubtfire where I'm just telling stories. They wanted to see how I would be with Robin. And I told him a very long-winded story about a little bunny having an adventure. And it's really funny, at the end of it, he whistles and looks right into the camera and goes, "We'll be right back." So yeah, writing was really what I wanted to do. I wanted to write before I could write, and I wanted to tell stories, and the performing of it was just something that was almost secondary. So I got a little older, and I thought film wasn't as fun anymore. I wasn't playing the kind of parts that I wanted to get, and I was also, I was an awkward preteen, and they always want teenagers to be playing preteens and preteens to be playing kids, and I couldn't anymore. Additionally, I also discovered theater at this time. It's funny, I make the joke that, I wanted to run away from the film industry and be in community theater, and I did. It felt so much more like a big deal to me to get a part in the play than it did in film. I don't know if it's just like an inherent masochism or what, but I love working for things. I like working hard. I like, metaphorically speaking, getting my hands dirty. And in film, you don't really get to see the payoff so much. You're sort of separate from the end results until the premiere. So that disconnect, I didn't really enjoy so much. I would say do not push your child into acting. Do not be the one to push your child into it. You can push your child to do other things. You can push your child to take acting classes even, if that's what you insist. I don't think I would do that with my children. But don't push them into it. Let them make their own decision. Let them keep the money that they've made and save it for an education, because they do need an education. And I would also say that you have to think about why you want to do it. Don't do it to become famous. Being famous is not very fun for kids, I found. The glamour kind of fades. The glamour fades quickly, and you adapt to it, even as a kid. It's the same thing with a lot of gifted children, where they will get so much praise and be told so many times, you are great, you are brilliant, you are this, that they always feel like they have to rise to that level for the rest of their lives. And I've seen that happen with people who were told they were so brilliant when they were young, that they're always feeling like they have to overcome it later on. I would say if you do want to act, the best thing to do, I think, is to do like 1 or 2 films, then go back to real life. Have it be an experience, not a career. I would say, obviously there are always going to be children doing this, and personally I cannot wait until we have, the CGI kids, to fill in for the actual child actor. When I was a younger child, I had watched Shining Time Station, so I knew Mr. Conductor, and I know Dee Dee Khan, and I knew all of that sort of cast of characters as well. So it felt very familiar to me. It was a really fun show to watch. By the time I got the script, I think I had grown out of it a little bit. I still had fond memories of it, but I think I was 11 or 12 and thought that that was for younger kids. But the thing was that I'd always liked younger kids, and I'd always liked being in movies for kids. So it felt, it still felt like a fun thing to do. I think at that time I was probably taking time off from acting just to go to school and be a normal kid for a couple of years. I did that a lot when I was a kid. I think I thought that it would be fun to do a little bit of acting again, and especially one that sounded like it would be fun to do. Britt really cared about the world. She had put a lot into this world, and she obviously cared about it a lot. And that was something that I could tell from talking to her. It was something that meant a lot to her. She was very kind to me the entire production, and we had a lot of fun. She was very funny, and I really am glad that I got to know her. I think at that time in my life, I was probably a little bit cynical, the way that a lot of preteens and teenagers are. And I think that Britt kind of brought a spark of magic into my life, which was really nice. I think I got to go on some fun adventures because of her. There were so many people on it that were just so kind, and so many people on it that were just so interesting and had so many stories and so much that you could learn from. People like Russell Means and Peter Fonda are definitely people who have a million stories. So that was always really interesting. Peter Fonda, I think, still had kind of a touch of the eccentric to him. Dee Dee Khan was one of the kindest people I've ever met, still remains one of the kindest people I've ever met. Cody, who played Patch, he was really fun, and Michael Rogers was probably my favorite person on set just because he was so funny, always telling jokes and doing impressions and just had us laughing the entire time. I will say that Alec Baldwin's voice for James was probably my favorite. He had a really great voice for James that was very, very funny. It was really interesting to the way that they integrated everything, the way that they integrated us into the set, and the way that they integrated us into the world, because sometimes there would be scenes where you were just sitting on something and you knew that you were going to be flying through the air, but you didn't know how. You knew that they were going to be making a body cast of you, but you weren't quite sure what it was for and how it would look at the end. And you just kind of had to trust, and you just kind of had to go with it. And then later on, you would get to sort of see how it really was. Or sometimes, you would be getting to ride with Thomas, but you wouldn't be. You would just be in this little set where people would be shaking it back and forth, and you just kind of had to use your imagination. I don't know, sometimes I wonder if I'd been a little bit younger or a little bit older when I'd filmed this, if maybe I would have taken the imagination part a little more seriously. And I kind of wish that I had, because there aren't many times in life to really be able to disappear into that kind of imagination. And the places that we filmed were just beautiful. I mean, I still don't think I've been to any place in the world that is as beautiful as the Isle of Man. Just purple heather and blue ocean and green grass everywhere. Such beautiful old trains and such beautiful old buildings and so much history and so many interesting people there. It was a really beautiful place to go. I had a really wonderful time there. And then we got to film a lot in Toronto as well, and Toronto is really fun and always has been one of my favorite cities. I filmed a lot of movies when I was a kid, but just because of the people and places, Thomas was one of the most fun movies I worked on. When I saw the movie, I remember thinking, wait, that's not how it's supposed to go. That's not what the plot is. And it felt strange to me that they made Diesel into this villain on the level of humans, because to me, I always felt like it made more sense to have the humans, who are the ones building the trains, the ones building the railroads and railways, for them to be the ones that are the villains. And they took out so much of that, and that felt very strange to me. It took out this entire conflict, and they also cut down so much about my grandfather's character and his amount of loss and what he was, feeling, and his regret and frustration and sadness, and so much of our relationship as well. And so watching the movie, I do remember being disappointed. I still was happy with how it had turned out, but I was disappointed with what they had cut and the way that it had gone. And I do remember feeling frustrated, like, hey, what happened to this? And there never really was any explanation for that. I remember there was one scene where Junior, played by Michael Rogers, was supposed to get covered in chocolate milkshake because, he's small and he's drinking a giant chocolate shake, and he drinks his summer sundae and he just gets completely covered in chocolate, and they could only do the shot, 1 or 2 times, and he got completely covered from head to toe, and he didn't have a shower in his trailer, so he had to come in and use mine. And I remember coming into my trailer later and seeing like chocolate footprints and then they ended up not using it. And Britt said she felt so terrible that she took Michael out to dinner to apologize. There were so many kind and funny people working on it. And it was really fun to see all the models of the trains and to look at them and to see, what eventually we would be. And to know that we were, going to be joining these two worlds together.
As I got older, I got more into filmmaking and stuff, and I learned about the whole P.T. Boomer plot line that got cut out of the movie. And also how in the original story, it seemed like it was how Thomas related to Lily as opposed to Lily being part of Thomas's story. So I was wondering, what did you think? Like, I saw like a lot of the rough cut that recently, got bootlegged online. How do you feel about the final cut? Do you wish it was more like what Britt Allcroft originally intended to be?
I definitely do. I remember watching the movie and thinking, what? They cut out a whole big part and they made Diesel the villain, and that doesn't really make sense. I mean, Diesel is obnoxious, but he's not a villain. And being very confused when I watched it and being sort of sad. And there was a lot more about Lily as a character and a lot more about Lily and Patch and their connection to the island. And it was very strange. And a couple years ago, I talked to Britt and she said that she felt bullied into it. She felt like she was pushed into it. And she was, there weren't a lot of women, working in Hollywood at the time. And there were a lot of, kind of old guard people who were like pushing her into things. And I felt horribly sorry for her. And I really wish that it had stayed closer to her vision. I think that there was so much, there was even the scene where I fell out and Thomas had to come back to rescue me. And that would have been so much fun. That would have been like a fun bonding exercise for us. And I think Thomas had to overcome a fear to do it too. So yeah, I'm very sad that they didn't do it. I'm glad that they've released more of it, but maybe hopefully one day we will actually have the director's cut, if you will.
We knew that we were making it for British audiences and for American audiences. And I remember there was a bit of a controversy in the news because they thought that we were going to completely Americanize the film and that we were going to change the names of, the trains to things like Brad and Chuck. And no, we weren't, we had some things like the Fat Controller and Sir Topham Hatt. Like, we weren't going to call him the Fat Controller because we never did in the US.